August 1980. In Gdansk, 15,000 shipyard workers begin an occupation strike. They protest against the dismissal of crane operator Anna Valentinovich, who was fired just 5 months before retirement. The strike lasts 3 days, and in the end, the protesters succeed. Valentinovich is reinstated. As it soon turns out, this protest is just the beginning. More will follow. And they will no longer be just about the future of one individual, but about all 35 million Poles. The series of protests will lead to the creation of the now legendary trade union movement Solidarity, and ultimately to freedom. The then 36-year-old electrician Lech Wałęsa, who from the beginning took the lead in the protests, will be propelled by the events into a position he likely could not have imagined even in his wildest dreams. He will become one of the symbols of communism's downfall and rank among the most important Poles in modern history. To understand the situation in Poland, and thus the life story of Lech Wałęsa, we must go back 10 years before 1980. In December 1970, the communist economy was on the brink of collapse. Stores were nearly empty, and the few goods available, flour, eggs, sugar, fish, and meat, had to be made even more expensive, on average by 30%, as communist leaders attempted to save the country from economic disaster. The poverty-stricken population was losing patience. In northern Poland, people took to the streets, demonstrating mainly in front of party headquarters, throwing stones at windows, and some even looting stores. Soon street protests were joined by strikes in major industrial plants. The first to declare a strike were the massive shipyards in Gdansk and Gdynia. One of the key members of the strike committee was none other than Lech Wałęsa. The protests grew to enormous proportions, more factories joined in, and the communist officials decided on a radical solution. They sent in 500 tanks, 700 armored personnel carriers, and 32,000 soldiers. Polish communist leader Gomułka even authorized them to open fire on the demonstrators. The result? 41 dead, 1,200 injured, and 3,000 arrested. The victims were mostly young people, many of them just bystanders. However, the protests were ultimately crushed. Lech Wałęsa spent several days in detention, but was soon released and allowed to continue his work as a shipyard electrician. However, his criticism of the regime did not end. On the contrary, it intensified. He organized discussions with workers, distributed underground publications, and became a member of the banned free trade unions. When he publicly criticized the state-controlled unions in the Gdansk shipyard, his employers lost patience and fired him. Wałęsa then became even more active, for which the regime repeatedly detained him. And here we have a small digression that may seem unrelated to the story, but in reality, it is deeply connected. In 1978, the first Slavic Pope was elected, and more importantly, he came from the communist part of the world, Polish-born Karol Wojtyła, who took the name John Paul II. For Poles, who remained a deeply religious nation despite all communist efforts, it felt almost like a miracle. Lech Wałęsa also comes from a deeply religious family. His father, Bolesław, was a farmer and carpenter, while his mother, Felixa, took care of their 4 children. Lech was the youngest of them. The family lived in extreme poverty, and he often spoke about how their faith in God filled them with happiness and hope. So, when Pope John Paul II visited his homeland in 1979, all of Poland was consumed by the event. And when at the end of his sermon before a crowd of hundreds of thousands in Warsaw, he uttered the following words, they had a magical effect on Poles.
Niech wstąpi duch Twój. Niech wstąpi duch Twój. i odnowi oblicze ziemi tej ziemi.
The Polish people longed for freedom, especially since the economic situation has once again become unsustainable. Basic food items are missing from stores, and people are forced to rely on the black market, where prices reach astronomical levels. A strike is being prepared at the Gdansk shipyards. The organizers discuss who should lead it and agree on one name, Lech Wałęsa. Although he has not worked at the shipyard for 4 years, he is active in the underground trade unions. To re-enter the shipyard, he even has to climb over a wall, as he would not be allowed in otherwise. Then, events move quickly. On August 14th, 15,000 workers go on strike in support of crane operator Walentinowicz. This time, the strikers choose a different strategy than in 1970, when their street protests were brutally suppressed by gunfire. They stay inside the shipyard, and after 3 days of negotiations they achieve their demands. Not only is Walentinowicz reinstated, but Wałęsa as well. The strikers also receive a promise that they will not be punished and that free union elections will be held. It almost remains just a victory for the workers of a single company. But as people begin leaving the shipyard, they are stopped at the gate by tram driver Henryka Krivonos, who urges them not to end the strike until the demands of other striking companies that had joined them are also met. This leads to the creation of the General Strike Committee, which formulates 21 demands representing all the strikers. They post the list on the shipyard gate and place a photograph of Pope John Paul II beside it. For the communists, it is such a shock that at first they do not know how to respond. Shooting at workers like in 1970 is no longer an option, so by the end of August, around 700,000 employees from 700 companies joined the strike. On August 31st, 1980, the communists agreed to the strikers' demands. At 4 in the afternoon, Lech Wałęsa, as head of the General Strike Committee, and Deputy Prime Minister Mieczysław Jagielski signed the relevant agreements. The strikers celebrate victory, and from the General Strike Committee, solidarity is born, an independent trade union movement uniting trade unions across Poland. Within its first year, it gains 10 million members. A period known as the Carnival of Solidarity begins. Suddenly, books by banned authors are being published, theaters stage performances without censorship approval, and Solidarity launches its own weekly newspaper informing members about their rights. It feels like a beautiful dream. The loosening of control in Poland and the immense popularity of Solidarity are, of course, viewed with discontent by Soviet communists led by Leonid Brezhnev. A military intervention, similar to the one in 1968 in Czechoslovakia, is on the table. At a meeting in Moscow in December 1980, leaders from Czechoslovakia and East Germany advocate for an invasion. In contrast, the communists from Hungary and Romania oppose an attack on Poland. In the end, the communist leaders decide to handle the situation differently. Polish General Wojciech Jaruzelski declares a state of emergency, and within the first hours, the Polish secret police launch a crackdown on Solidarity leaders across Poland. The movement is outlawed and Lech Wałęsa is arrested. He will not be released until nearly a year later. At the beginning of 1983, Wałęsa returns to the Gdansk shipyard as a regular electrician. 2 years later, however, he is once again leading the semi-legal workplace unions. With Mikhail Gorbachev becoming head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, conditions begin to loosen across the Eastern Bloc. In 1988, Wałęsa once again takes up the fight. He calls for a strike to improve Solidarity's position in Poland, and once again, he succeeds. Solidarity becomes a legitimate organization, effectively a political party. In 1989, as communist regimes across Europe collapses, Solidarity wins the parliamentary elections, and on December 9, 1990, Poles elect Lech Wałęsa as their president. The story of an electrician from the Gdansk shipyard has reached an unbelievable conclusion.